Margarita had fallen over in her apartment. Her granddaughter, Alejandra Alday, would insist on getting a new place alongside her. Margarita did not want that. Her home was her home, and that was that. Alejandra respected her grandmother's decision. Her grandmother was her favorite person in the world. They had the best time going out together to bars, to opera, to museums. It was safe to say that everything was perfect. On the day that everything changed, Alejandra went to work early, leaving her grandmother fast asleep. When Alejandra went to call her grandmother at 3 p.m., the same time as she does every day, Margarita did not answer. Around noon that day, Margarita's neighbor, Omar, was eating lunch when, as he was closing their kitchen windows, locked eyes with a woman. The woman stood in Margarita's bedroom, rummaging through her drawers. The look could only be described as cold and hard. It was getting dark outside when Alejandra made it back to the house. She had forgotten her keys. So when she kept knocking and knocking, but there was continuously no response, she went straight to her neighbors. With their help, they managed to break the window into the house. Margarita was found dead lying on the ground. Alejandra knew her grandma. She knew what she kept tidy, especially when it came to her decor and pillow placements. When one of the pillows in the living room seemed out of place, she knew that was not normal. Margarita's blood was found on that pillow, leading to the conclusion that she was suffocated. Mexico loves their grandmas. They are like the gem of the nation. It was as though any elderly woman was your grandma, even if there was no relation. That's why nobody could understand why one of the most vulnerable groups was being targeted. Residents were rightfully horrified when women over the age of 60 were being murdered. It quickly became a high-profile case, and the Mexican police could no longer ignore the patterns between these murders happening in Mexico City. It wasn't just a media sensation tying the murders together. They were dealing with a serial killer, the first recorded serial killer in Mexico to be exact, and they dubbed them La Mataviejitas, or the little old lady killer. The murders generated much more outrage than other killings in the country, said Laura Waldenberg, producer of The Lady of Silence, the Mataviejitas murders. Between 1998 to 2005, at least 49 murders were recorded connected to the case. In that same documentary, Gloria Enadina Rizzo's daughter described her mom as demanding but kind and would do anything for her. She felt lucky to have Gloria as a mom and a grandma to her kids. On October 28, 2003, everything changed after one phone call. She couldn't have imagined her nephew telling her that Gloria was dead, strangled with a cord. The item used to strangle Gloria was still around the neck when her body was sent to the forensic unit. The little old lady killer was sitting with the doorman of an apartment building, casually asking him about the residents. They must have asked the correct questions, and she soon found out that Maria Dolores lived by herself. Over a month or two, they quickly gained the trust of Maria Dolores. They befriended each other, during which they learned Maria's habits and everyday routines. On October 24, 2004, Maria Dolores was beaten and strangled with a stethoscope until her neck snapped. Months after Maria Dolores' murder, the police went to the media to declare the prime suspect. The profile based on eyewitnesses described the killer as a man dressed as a woman, dressed in white, height between 170 and 175 meters, robust complexion, light brown oval face, wide cheeks, blonde hair, delineated eyebrows, and approximately 45 years old. The Mexican Department of Justice declared another possible profile, based on their examination of serial killers that targeted elderly women in France. The profile being a man with homosexual preferences, a victim of childhood physical abuse, lived surrounded by women, he could have had a grandmother or lived with an elderly person, has resentment to that feminine figure, and possesses great intelligence. They were so adamant it had to be a man, based on the nature of the crimes. Investigators doubted it was a woman, given the significant strength needed to strangle the victims. In a move that was heavily criticized, the police were on the search for a homosexual man, transvestite or transgendered. Per the logic of the police at the time, if the suspect cross-dresses, then they must be a sex worker. They detained 49 transvestite prostitutes in an insanely inhumane manner. Almadelia was working when they noticed several patrol cars around. They began to arrest Alma and the other sex workers by force, even going so far as to use tear gas. Those sex workers were essentially kidnapped, and it was a full-on raid. Police showed zero respect to them, offered them no decency, and ignored all of their rights and duties. In the documentary, in an attempt to defend themselves, Guillermo Zayas, who worked as the homicide prosecutor at the time, stated that they couldn't rule anything out, especially since it was a very sensitive case. Again and again, the police were arresting anybody just based on physical appearance, mixed in with some prejudice. All that was done to remedy the situation was an apology, followed by their defense of needing to investigate whoever fit the description. Here is what they knew about the serial killer's MO. The little old lady killer pretended to be a social worker or nurse from the city council when she contacted her victims on the street or at their doors. At first, she would only wear white clothing, but eventually she obtained a real nurse's costume. She would earn her victims' trust and entry into their houses by providing massages or assistance in acquiring financial aid and medical supplies, depending on how wealthy they were. The disguise also included carrying a bag of medical supplies, but their usual method of strangling victims was manual or with a ligature. She would grab from the victim's house. After killing them, the little old lady killer would also loot the victims, primarily for personal benefit, but she would also retain some of their belongings as trophies. On April 1, 2004, there was a huge break. A victim's family member found a fingerprint on a piece of glass at the murder scene. Araceli Vázquez Garcia's horror started when her face appeared on millions of television screens across Mexico. The small, middle-aged woman went on to be called La Mataviejitas, the old lady killer, after that. Vázquez was connected to a string of elderly woman murders that terrorized Mexico City. Local authorities claimed to have discovered one of her fingerprints on a glass at a crime scene, and the family of the victim, Gloria Enadina Rizo Ramirez, 81, had identified stolen jewelry in Vázquez's possession. Later, both claims would be proven false. Vázquez firmly denied being a serial killer, even though she admitted right away to having committed multiple robberies. Vázquez was also accused of and sentenced to 23 years for the murder of Margarita Aceves, all based on inconclusive evidence. The eyewitnesses did not recognize Vázquez as the killer. On the day of Margarita Aceves's murder, a neighbor named Imelda was enjoying her time outside when a tall woman approached her wearing a white lab coat, reminiscent of that of a doctor or a nurse, and had short, blonde hair. That woman asked Imelda if she knew of any elderly people living alone so she could offer them a 45% pension increase. They said yes and pointed at the Margarita's window. Other neighbors claimed to have seen when Margarita led the tall woman in the lab coat into her building. The next day, Margarita was found dead by her husband. The neighbors testified the day after the crime to give their statement, all of them giving a consistent physical description of the suspect. 3 months later, Vázquez gets arrested. When Margarita's neighbors were called to view Vázquez's photograph and view her through the one-way mirror, no one identified her as the suspect who was with the victim. As mentioned, Vázquez is fairly short, and the suspect was continuously described as tall and bulky. The 3 items they found on her, white coat, wig, and jewelry, were seemingly enough evidence to convict Vázquez, who maintains that they were planted in her house by homicide investigators led by Guillermo Zayas. Vázquez was paraded at the press conference wearing the same wig and white lab coat allegedly found in her home. A few months after Araceli's arrest, the murders did not stop. In fact, 30 additional killings in the 22 months following her arrest would validate her plea. Similarly to Vázquez, Jorge Mario Tablas Silva was accused in September 2004 of the killings of 4 elderly women based on seemingly arbitrary decisions. However, 2 counts were later dismissed. Like Vázquez, Maria Guadalupe González Juanbels's murder scene supposedly had Tablas' fingerprint. Later on, it was discovered to be false. The proof of his guilt was fabricated, as the case file makes clear. Although 2 witnesses had positively recognized Tablas, a convenient denial was made by one of the workers at the victim's house. She stated in her testimony that she saw a woman with her boss, but later she recanted, saying she actually saw a man dressed like a woman. Reporter Antonio Baranda claims that Tablas passed away in prison. It seems that he was later speculated to be a copycat of the little old lady killer. The police were in absolute shambles trying to capture the little old lady killer. This resulted in arresting then investigation instead of investigating then arresting. Based on all the murders from 1998 to 2005, investigators learned, with the help of Gabriel Regino, Secretary of Public Security, that the murders were taken place near or connected to main roads, which have fast escape routes. Jose Ismael Alvarado and Jesus Briones were patrolling on January 25, 2006, the day Ana Maria de los Reyes was murdered. Joel Lopez, Ana Maria's friend and neighbor, was late coming home from work that day. Upon arrival, he noticed windows were open, and finding this strange, he went inside to investigate. He saw clothes and belongings all scattered in the bedroom. Coming out to the living rooms where he found Ana Maria's dead body, he was in utter shock. A moment later, a noise was heard a few paces away. Joel Lopez was now face to face and eye to eye with a woman. No words were spoken, but the woman slowly walked out of the living room and kept frantically walking away down the street. The police were patrolling Zaragoza Street at that moment when they saw Jose running towards the police car, asking for help. They managed to grab the culprit right before she could get on the train. The little old lady killer was finally arrested in Venustiano Carranza Borough on January 25, 2006. The police were surprised at how calm she was. She began praying once in the patrol car, then continued on to eat a sandwich she had stashed in her bag. As she was bombarded by the media after her arrest, she was always trying to hide her face with her famously red trench coat. She had been carrying 2 bags. In one of them, there were voter ID cards for seniors, several wrestlers' business cards, and membership to pro wrestling rings, along with a keychain card that was soon found out to be her own wrestling name, the Lady of Silence, professional wrestler, wrestling female world champion. Her name was Juana Barraza, a 48-year-old single mother with a troubled past who led police to believe she was a professional wrestler. The forensic team had also speculated that they were looking for possibly a male wrestler due to the way they performed a headlock on the victims to strangle them. The chokehold was done with an object that would ultimately kill the victim. So when Gabriel Regino went into the interrogation room, he knew they found the killer instantly upon seeing her physique. Juana's hands were big and her build was strong. He managed to get Juana to admit that her favorite sport was wrestling. It would later be found out that she was more so a wannabe wrestler that went by the stage name the Lady of Silence. She was a devoted fan of lucha libre. In actuality, all she really loved was lucha libre, a kind of Mexican wrestling where the wrestlers wear masks. It was claimed that although she had never participated in a professional match, she mingled with wrestlers, gave them loans, and saw herself as one of them. As a matter of fact, a poster-sized portrait of Barraza dressed like a wrestler took center stage in her messy home. A few weeks prior to her arrest, Barraza gave an interview to a major television channel called Azteca Noticias at a wrestling match, describing herself as rudo to the core. Operantly, she organized wrestling matches at small-town parties and was frequently spotted in the front rows of the well-known arenas. Juana Barraza murdered Ana Maria de los Reyes by feigning being super dehydrated while on a walk. She knocked on her door and asked to borrow a glass of water. Ana Maria was a very compassionate lady. She gladly allowed Barraza to enter her home. Not long after, Juana saw a stethoscope on the living room table and used it to strangle Ana Maria. During the interrogation, she was asked her motive for committing the murder of Ana Maria. She said it was out of frustration. Juana initially kept insisting that it was the first kill that started with an argument, so there was no premeditation on her part. She told the police about her troubled past, starting by claiming she was abused as a child by her mom, and that is the reason she has such resentment and hatred towards older women. They reminded Juana of her mom. At the age of 12, her mom gave her away to an old man in exchange for a carton of beer. Since this was the first known serial killer in Mexican history, which just so happens to be a woman, a lot of fascination was put on her psychology, and investigators wanted to know her way of thinking. They started by asking her to demonstrate how exactly she would commit the murders, and so Barraza is seen enthusiastically demonstrating for law enforcers how she committed her strangulations, looking proud as she tightens a pair of stockings around the neck of a criminologist. There aren't many public hearings and no juries in Mexican legal proceedings. Instead, prosecutors and defense attorneys submit their cases to a single judge. Emilio Alvarez, human rights ombudsman for Mexico City, said this about the Mexican justice system. The presumption of innocence is not clearly established here. The media has become the great judge. During the span of 8 years and her fingerprints matched at least 10 murders, Juana Barraza was charged with 759 years, 17 murders, and 12 robbery charges, the longest sentence in Mexico at the time. That lengthy sentence was a statement to appease the public and serve as a warning to other potential killers. Alejandra Alde told Netflix in the documentary The Lady of Silence, The Mataviejitas Murders. When she went to see her grandma's killer and confronted Juana on everything she took from her, a grandma, mom, and friend, all Juana responded with was, "But you left her alone," showing absolutely no remorse. Investigators suspected that due to Juana's childhood trauma, she used wrestling as a coping mechanism, and when she wasn't able to do that anymore, she needed to ease her frustrations somehow. According to Waldenberg, the old lady killer has found acceptance behind bars in a way that she never did before. She held a status to the point that even the guards were somewhat afraid of her. As she would walk by, others would move out of the way. A sad truth is that the story of the little old lady killer was so sensationalized due to the killer being a woman and into wrestling rather than the actual nature of her murders and the remembrance of the victims. There is a true crime book on Barraza's murdering spree. Mexican pop diva Amanda Titita wrote a campy song about her, and there are many t-shirts depicting Barraza with devil horns in a fake wrestling poster where she is pitted against an angelic grandma. In 2015, she got married to another inmate along with 48 other couples who took their vows at the prison. Before their wedding day, they had never laid eyes on one another, and once they were married, their romance did not last. "Once we saw each other, the love vanished," Mataviejitas said to a deputy. In the course of their 1-year marriage, they spent a total of 40 minutes together just 3 times. They divorced 1 year later. In 2014, Barraza told the Mexico City daily Excelsior in an interview that she sleeps well at night and that she was happy with her life. Araceli Vasquez, who has been falsely charged with the little old lady murders, was hopeful that Juana Barraza's arrest would be enough to deem her innocent of the murder charges, but unfortunately, she was abandoned by the justice system. During an interview at the Santa Marta prison on September 23, 2022, she said, "I just want it known that I wasn't the one who killed that woman. The evidence is right there. I've been keeping quiet for 18 years. I used to steal. I've always admitted that." The absolutely ridiculous way the police handled Araceli's arrest was brought to light. They paraded her in front of the media wearing a wig to make it more sensationalized. The connection she had with the victims was because she did steal some of their belongings, and that is something Araceli openly admits. She pleads that she did commit robberies, but she did not commit murder. In the Netflix documentary, the attorneys involved in the investigations, Bernardo Batiz and Renato Salas, told the interviewers that they did not remember Araceli's case. When faced with the question as to why Araceli remained in prison, even after it was known she had no involvement with the murders and was not the little old lady killer, they implicated that there must have been other charges against her then. Araceli was falsely imprisoned for 19 years, despite evidence of her innocence and the conviction of the real murderer. Vasquez is currently serving time for 5 crimes. Recently revealed declassified court documents pertaining to Juana Barraza and Araceli Vasquez reveal a history of carelessness, manipulation, and lack of transparency during the investigation, in addition to many arbitrary arrests. Joel, a close friend of Ana Maria, said, "The killer leaves a great pain behind, and people don't realize what they leave. They leave holes in people's lives."